Face the chairs. You handled the missing briefcase, and you're making this harder than it needs to be.
Officer Evan Rourke twisted Nia Holloway's injured arm as travelers watched. Her first-class ticket was valid. Her answers matched the camera. None of it mattered. He had already decided the black woman in the worn green jacket did not belong there. Then he forced her lower. Nia moved once, fast enough to drop him to one knee, controlled enough to leave him unhurt. She stepped back, one wrist cuffed.
I released you. Don't lie and say I attacked you.
20 minutes earlier, none of this had happened. Atlanta had not woken, but Concourse F was carrying the weight of the day. Suitcase wheels clicked over polished tile. Coffee machines hissed behind glass counters. Boarding announcements drifted through the air in calm, practiced voices that made delay, urgency, and disappointment sound routine. Nia Holloway entered the terminal at 7:20 with an olive jacket worn soft at the elbows, dark jeans, plain walking shoes, and a rolling suitcase patched at one corner with black tape. Nothing about her asked to be noticed. That was intentional. She had spent 15 years in places where attention could turn dangerous. Now she wanted a life where no one studied her face, checked her posture, or wondered what she had done before sunrise in places left off ordinary maps. Her flight to Washington did not leave for nearly 2 hours. Her first-class itinerary and airline status gave her confirmed lounge access, but she passed the priority line without using it. No reason to rush. No reason to invite the small looks that sometimes followed a black woman carrying modest luggage into spaces designed to make wealth visible. She bought coffee from a kiosk, checked gate F8 twice, then stopped near the windows overlooking the taxiway. From there, she could see the corridor behind her reflected in the glass. She could also see the exit doors, the security desk, and the passage leading toward the premium lounge. She did not choose the spot consciously. Old habits placed the corridor, exits, and security desk within view. Her eyes found a ceiling camera partly blocked by a cleaning cart, and she shifted her stance so the moving crowd never disappeared behind her. She took a slow drink of coffee and reminded herself that this morning contained no convoy, no emergency channel, no frightened staff waiting for orders. Just a flight, a new job, a chance to teach crisis response from a classroom instead of living it in real time. That thought softened something in her face, though only for a moment. She started toward the lounge, pulling the damaged suitcase behind her. Near a charging station, a black leather briefcase sat in the center of the walkway. A traveler pushing a luggage cart was approaching too quickly to stop. Nia called out, "Does this belong to anyone?" No one answered. With the cart only seconds away, she lifted the case by the handle, moved it less than 3 feet, and placed it against the base of the charging table. She did not open it or inspect the tag. Then she continued walking. Above her, a security camera recorded the movement, but the cleaning cart blocked the final seconds. Across the corridor, Officer Evan Rourke watched Nia approach the entrance to the airline lounge. His eyes settled first on the faded jacket, then the taped suitcase, then her face. Only after that did he notice the boarding pass on her phone. Beside him, Officer Hannah Pierce followed his gaze. Evan leaned closer and kept his voice low. "Are you sure she belongs in that corridor?" Hannah turned toward him, surprised by the question, but before she could answer, their radios crackled. A report came through about a missing briefcase containing sensitive equipment. Evan looked toward the charging station, then back at Nia as she disappeared into the premium corridor. 2 unrelated moments met inside his mind and became a story before either had been checked. A few minutes earlier, Graham Vale had been seated at the charging counter with his laptop open and his phone pressed to his ear. At 54, he had learned to make urgency look professional. His navy suit remained smooth, his voice low, his irritation hidden behind polite sentences people used when money depended on everyone pretending not to panic. The briefcase beside his chair held more than travel documents. Inside was an encrypted company laptop, an unsigned contract tied to a Washington merger, a security device worth nearly $5,000, and a folder of projections meant for a room with closed doors. Graham trusted the case more than cloud storage. That morning, he trusted his memory too much. His phone rang with an urgent update from legal. He stepped only a few yards away in search of a quieter signal, believing he would be gone for seconds, and failed to notice that the briefcase remained beside the outlet. 3 seats away, Owen Barrett was finishing an email while an identical black leather case rested by his foot. Owen wore a charcoal suit and the distracted expression of a man measuring time in missed calls. When an announcement warned that boarding for his flight was closing, he snapped his laptop shut, stood too quickly, and grabbed the wrong handle. Graham's case felt familiar enough. He never looked down. He hurried toward the plane train and disappeared into the crowd. By the time Graham returned, the space beside the outlet was empty. The color left his face. His hand went to the chair, the floor, the space beneath the counter, as though the case might return if he searched the same 3 feet hard enough. The device mattered. The data mattered more. A leaked contract could destroy months of negotiation before the Washington meeting. He called airport security with a voice that remained controlled only because fear had not yet found room to show. Evan Rourke arrived before the camera team had pulled every angle. Who was near the bag, he asked. Graham searched his memory. He remembered Nia because she had moved the briefcase. He remembered the faded green jacket, the taped suitcase, the way she stood apart from business travelers. A black woman in an old green jacket moved it, he said. He did not say he saw her take it. He did not say she opened it or carried it away. But Evan heard certainty where Graham had offered only description. Graham also remembered Owen, though differently. There was a businessman working nearby, he added. Suit, laptop. Probably heading to a meeting. The 2 people had occupied the same space. One became a profession. The other became a color, a coat, and an action. Evan did not notice the difference. In the monitoring room, an employee pulled up the nearest camera. The footage showed Nia bending toward the case and lifting it. Before the screen revealed where she placed it, a cleaning cart blocked the lower half of the frame. Hannah Pierce leaned toward the monitor. "We need the rear corridor angle," she said, "and the plane train entrance." Evan kept his eyes on the frozen image of Nia holding the handle. "We already have enough to speak with her." Hannah looked at him. Enough to ask questions, maybe. Not enough to decide what happened. His jaw tightened. The behavior is clear. It was not clear. It was incomplete. But incomplete evidence can feel convincing when it supports a story someone already believes. While the next file loaded, Evan turned away and headed for the premium corridor. Hannah followed after hesitating. Behind them, the screen advanced to the next angle, where Owen Barrett could be seen heading toward the plane train with Graham's briefcase. No one was watching. Owen was seated on the train, his own case beside the charging station, and he had not noticed the weight of someone else's mistake resting against his shoe. Nia had almost reached the airline lounge when Evan stepped into her path. He did not introduce himself. He did not ask her name. He did not mention the missing briefcase. His eyes moved from her patched suitcase to the phone in her hand, then back to her face. "How did you get access to this area?" The question was quiet, but it carried an accusation before any accusation had been spoken. A stop. For 1 second, something old and tired passed through her expression, the recognition of a familiar test. She had faced versions of it in hotel lobbies, conference centers, private terminals, and government buildings where her clearance exceeded that of the people demanding proof. She did not sigh. She did not show irritation. She opened the airline app and held out her digital boarding pass. First class, gate F8. Evan handed the phone to the lounge agent. The agent scanned the code. The screen flashed green. Valid. At Evan's insistence, she scanned it again. Green. Valid again. Nia handed him her driver's license without being asked twice. The name matched. The photograph matched. Nothing in the documents supported the suspicion already forming in his posture. Still, he pointed toward the wall. "Stand over there." At that moment, a white man in a blue blazer approached the lounge gate. His boarding code flashed red. The man laughed awkwardly and blamed the airline app. Evan stepped aside and said, "No problem, sir. The lounge agent can straighten that out for you." The man passed between them carrying an expensive leather backpack, his access unresolved. Nia's access had been confirmed twice, yet she remained against the wall. She watched him go without comment. Evan returned her phone but kept her license. Were you carrying a black briefcase this morning? No. Did you touch one? Nia studied his face. There was a case in the walkway near the charging counter, she said. Someone nearly hit it with a luggage cart. I moved it beside the table and kept walking. Evan's gaze sharpened, as if she had offered a confession instead of an ordinary explanation. So you admit you handled it. I told you exactly what I did. Where is it now? Where I left it? Hannah stood several feet behind him, listening. Nia looked toward her, then back at Evan. Check the rear camera. The ceiling camera near the counter was partly blocked by a cleaning cart. The angle from the corridor should show where I put it. Evan's face changed slightly. Not surprised that she had noticed the cameras. Discomfort that she had noticed more than he had. Nia continued before he could interrupt. Check the access scans for everyone who entered the area. Look for another black case. Contact lost and found before you search my luggage. Evan ignored every suggestion. Open your bag. Am I being detained? I'm asking for cooperation. That was not my question. His jaw tightened. Around them, the lounge entrance grew quieter. Travelers slowed, without admitting they were watching. Graham stood near the security desk, receiving soft assurances from another employee. Evan had spoken to him with patience, his voice lowered as if protecting a man already under stress. With Nia, every sentence came as an order. If you have nothing to hide, Evan said. This should be easy. Nia felt anger stir beneath her ribs, not hot or reckless, but old. She held it where she had learned to hold fear, fatigue, and pain, behind steady breathing and careful words. Cooperation does not mean giving up the right to know why I'm being held. Evan stared at her. Where did you learn to talk to police like that? He asked. Nia's eyes narrowed by the smallest degree. I learned to answer questions clearly. A few seats away, Tessa Morgan lowered the coffee she had been holding. She had watched Evan reassure Graham, had heard him call the missing case an unfortunate situation. Now she heard the same officer treat Nia's valid ticket, direct answers, and practical suggestions as obstacles. Tessa placed her cup beside her chair, opened the camera on her phone, and began recording. Nia noticed the movement in the reflection of the lounge glass. She said nothing. She looked at Evan and understood the encounter had shifted. He was no longer trying to locate a briefcase. He was trying to make the first judgment he had made about her come true. Evan returned Nia's driver's license but did not step aside. The small circle around them had tightened without anyone admitting it. Travelers slowed near the lounge entrance. A gate employee stood behind the desk with one hand resting above the keyboard, watching but not intervening. Tessa's phone remained low near her lap, its camera fixed on Evan's hands. Put the bag down, Evan said. Nia lowered her tote beside the patched suitcase. Now step away from it. She moved back 2 measured steps and left both hands visible. The instructions were simple, and she followed each one exactly. That should have reduced the tension. Instead, Evan seemed irritated by how little resistance she gave him. Her compliance denied him the argument he appeared ready to have. I need to see a second photo ID, he said. Nia looked at her tote, then at Hannah. Would you like me to retrieve it, or would you prefer Officer Pierce to do it? Hannah opened her mouth, but Evan answered first. You get it. Nia held his gaze for a moment. She could feel the room changing around them, the way attention gathered when people sensed authority, beginning to outrun reason. Years of training had taught her never to make an unexpected movement around someone already afraid of losing control. She spoke slowly enough for the body camera, the ceiling camera, and every nearby phone to record each word. My passport is in the front pocket. I'm reaching for it now. She bent slightly and extended her right hand toward the zipper. Her fingertips had barely touched the fabric when Evan seized her wrist. He twisted her arm behind her with a suddenness that pulled a sharp breath from several people nearby. Nia's body went still, not stiff, still. You told me to retrieve my identification. You made an unauthorized movement. I announced the movement before I made it. Stop arguing. 5 feet away, a white passenger in a gray sport coat reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a phone. Evan did not look at him. He did not order the man to show his hands or accuse him of moving without permission. Tessa's camera caught both moments. Nia being grabbed for following an instruction and the other passenger moving freely without attracting a glance. Her mouth tightened, but she kept recording. Hannah's earpiece clicked. A security analyst spoke over the channel, reporting that a second camera showed a man in a suit leaving the charging area with a black briefcase. The analyst was tracking him toward the plane train. Hannah looked at Evan's back, correcting him before the crowd would expose that he had acted without checking the footage, so she told herself she would wait a few seconds and speak privately. Evan pulled Nia toward a row of metal seats. "Face the chairs," Nia complied. "Officer Rourke," Hannah began. He raised his voice before she could continue. "Hands where I can see them." Hannah stopped. The update remained trapped behind her teeth. Nia turned her head only enough to keep Evan at the edge of her vision. "My hands are visible. You're making this harder than it needs to be." The sentence carried a strange certainty, as though the difficulty had come from her questions rather than his choices. Evan pressed her forward and drew a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The first cuff closed around her right wrist with a metallic click. A pulse of memory moved through Nia's body. Confined rooms, shouted orders, the pressure of hands moving too fast. She pushed it down before it reached her face. In through the nose. Hold. Out slowly. Her feet stayed planted shoulder-width apart. Her fingers remained open. Above the lounge entrance, the ceiling camera's red indicator light glowed steadily. Nia fixed her eyes on it. At the far end of the corridor, Airport Police Sergeant Lorraine Price noticed the gathering crowd and changed direction. 16 years in airport policing had taught her to read a scene before hearing anyone's version of it. She saw Evan leaning forward, using more force than the situation appeared to require. She saw Hannah standing close enough to intervene but saying nothing. Then she saw Nia. The woman was not pulling away. She was not searching for an exit or testing the loose cuff. She was controlling her breathing with deliberate precision, as though every muscle in her body had received an order not to answer force with instinct. Lorraine quickened her pace. Evan reached for Nia's free wrist and dragged it sharply upward. Pain flashed across Nia's face before discipline covered it. Something inside her, trained over 15 years to respond before thought, moved closer to the surface. Pain arrived before fear. Evan had Nia's right wrist locked behind her, the cuff biting into her skin, while his other arm pressed across her upper back. The angle sent a sharp line through an old injury. Nia kept her voice level. "My right shoulder was injured in service. Change the angle." Evan heard strategy where she had offered information. "Stop stalling." He lifted her arm higher. The movement forced her toward the metal seats and turned the ache into something hot and immediate. Nia drew one breath through her nose. Tessa's camera stayed fixed on them. Hannah stood close enough to see the strain in Nia's face, yet Evan kept tightening his grip as if pain itself could prove guilt. "You are damaging my shoulder," Nia said. "Reduce the pressure." He did not. He drove his weight forward and tried to fold her over the seat. The edge of the metal backrest rushed toward her face. For one narrow instant, the terminal disappeared. Her body remembered rooms where hesitation caused injuries, where survival depended on moving before panic could form. 15 years of training rose through muscle and bone. Nia did not strike him. She did not reach for the equipment on his belt. She did not kick or turn anger into force. She found the small space left inside the cuff and rotated her wrist toward it. Her weight shifted off the trapped shoulder. Evan, still pulling, supplied the momentum she needed. Nia stepped aside, guided his arm across the seatback, and pinned his wrist against the metal with controlled pressure. Evan dropped to one knee, startled more than hurt. His radio tore loose and skidded across the tile. The movement lasted 4 seconds. Maybe less. Nia felt the moment when she had full control. She could have held him there. Instead, she released his wrist at once. She moved back 3 steps, raised her uncuffed hand, and kept the cuffed one visible. "I released you," she said. Pain pulsed beneath her calm. "Do not tell them I attacked you." Silence spread through the lounge entrance. A suitcase wheel stopped mid-roll. The gate employee lowered her hand from the keyboard. Even Graham stared at Nia with the dawning recognition that he had never been watching a thief. He had been watching someone survive an officer's mistake without allowing it to become a disaster. Tessa checked that her recording was still running. Hannah's face had gone pale. She had seen Nia release him the moment the pressure ended. Evan pushed himself upright. Humiliation crossed his face before anger covered it. He looked at the phones, the witnesses, Hannah, then Nia. The restraint everyone else had witnessed registered in his mind as defeat. He snatched the radio from the floor. "Officer assaulted by theft suspect," he said, breathless and loud. "Send assistance to the airline lounge entrance." Hannah stared at him. "Evan," he raised one hand. "Not now." The lie had already left the radio. It moved through security channels stripped of everything that came before. The valid ticket, the ignored camera angle, the order to retrieve identification, the injured shoulder, the release. What remained was a dangerous suspect and an assaulted officer. Nia looked toward Hannah. "You saw it." Hannah's throat tightened. "Yes, then remember all of it." Lorraine was only yards away now, moving through the crowd. She saw Evan standing free, Nia 3 steps back with one hand raised and the open cuff hanging from her wrist. Hannah approached cautiously. "I need to secure the second cuff." Nia could have refused. Instead, she turned her free hand outward. "Do it where the cameras can see." Hannah closed the cuff gently. Lorraine understood the choice immediately. Nia was not trying to win a fight. She was trying to stop a false story from becoming a tragedy. Then running footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor, several officers responding to a report that had never been true. 3 officers appeared at the far end of the corridor and moved toward the lounge with the urgency Evan's radio call had created. They had not heard Nia explain the briefcase. They had not seen her follow every instruction or watched Evan force her injured shoulder toward the metal seat. All they knew was the phrase sent across the channel: "Theft suspect assaulted an officer." One officer approached with his hand close to his belt. Another moved behind Nia, positioning himself where she could not see him clearly. The third went directly to Evan. "What happened?" Evan answered before anyone else could speak. "She handled the missing case, refused a lawful search, then attacked me when I tried to detain her." Each sentence removed a piece of the truth. Nia's questions became refusal. Her attempt to retrieve identification became suspicious movement. Her 4 seconds of restraint became an attack without cause. Nia did not interrupt him. Arguing with every false statement would only let Evan describe her as agitated. She looked toward the officer's body cameras instead. "Do not turn off your cameras," she said. "Preserve the ceiling footage. Review the radio traffic, and call a supervisor who was not involved in the stop." Her voice was quiet enough that the officers had to listen instead of react. Evan pointed toward her cuffed hands. "That is what she does. She controls the room. She's trained, which makes her more dangerous than she looks." Lorraine Price reached the edge of the group in time to hear him. "Everyone lower your hands," she ordered. "She is standing still, restrained, and surrounded. Nobody needs to reach for anything." The officers obeyed, though one hesitated. Lorraine stepped between Nia and Evan and studied the scene. Evan's breathing was uneven. Nia's right shoulder sat lower than the left, and a red mark had begun to form beneath the cuff. "You said she is more dangerous than she looks," Lorraine said. "When did her appearance become part of your evidence?" Evan blinked. "That's not what I meant." "Then tell me what you meant." "She knew how to take me down." "And did she continue after you were no longer applying force?" Evan glanced toward the phones around them. "You didn't see the beginning. Neither did the officers you just called." Tessa rose from her seat. Her hand trembled slightly, but the phone remained steady. "I did," she said. "I started recording before he touched her." Evan turned toward her. "A phone video does not show the full context." Lorraine held out her hand. "Then we will compare it with the body cameras, the ceiling cameras, and the radio record. That is how context works. We do not replace evidence with the loudest uniform." Tessa stepped closer, but kept the phone in her possession, showing Lorraine the running timestamp. The footage began with Nia standing beside her luggage, hands visible. Evan's expression tightened. Hannah's earpiece clicked again. The security analyst reported that a white male in a charcoal suit had been tracked across the terminal carrying the missing briefcase. Staff were moving to intercept him near the plane train. Hannah looked at Nia, then at the cuff around her wrist. The silence she had chosen earlier no longer felt cautious. It felt like participation. "Supervisor Price," she said, her voice strained, "I need to add something." Evan turned sharply. "Hannah." "Not here," she continued. "The monitoring team advised us to review another camera before Officer Rourke approached Ms. Holloway. He declined. I also received the first report about a man carrying the briefcase several minutes ago." The corridor seemed to contract around Evan. "And you waited until now?" Lorraine asked. Shame moved across Hannah's face. "Yes, I should have spoken sooner." Evan stared at her. "Whose side are you on?" Hannah met his eyes. "The side that matches the recording." Lorraine pointed toward one of the responding officers. "Escort Officer Rourke away from Ms. Holloway." No discussion between them. Then she addressed the others. "We are moving this entire matter to the monitoring room. Preserve every recording and every radio transmission. No summaries, no rewritten versions." Evan began to protest, but for the first time that morning, his voice was no longer controlling the scene. The monitoring room was smaller than Nia expected. Too cold from overworked vents and too bright under fluorescent panels. 4 screens filled the front wall. Lorraine stood beside the console while Hannah, Evan, Graham, and 2 security analysts gathered around. During the escort, Hannah had repositioned the cuffs in front of Nia. Red marks were already visible beneath the metal. Nobody offered her a chair. Nobody seemed sure whether doing so would look like courtesy or admission. The first camera showed Graham at the charging station, phone at his ear, the black briefcase beside his leg. He stood, turned toward the corridor, and left it behind. The second angle picked up Nia several minutes later. She paused when a luggage cart nearly struck the case, lifted it by the handle, and moved it against the charging table. She never opened it. She never looked inside. She walked away with the same tote and patched suitcase she had arrived with. The third camera showed Owen Barrett, wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a nearly identical case, gathering his laptop in a rush and taking Graham's briefcase instead of his own. Airport cameras tracked Owen onto the plane train, while his boarding record placed him at a gate in another concourse. Staff intercepted him near a boarding gate. On the live feed, Owen looked down at the case, opened his mouth in disbelief, and handed it over at once. A uniformed employee spoke to him calmly and guided him toward an office. Owen's own briefcase had already been secured at the charging station and was returned to him after staff verified his identity. No cuffs, no hands on his shoulders, no crowd closing around him. Nia watched without moving. Her face stayed composed, but something in her eyes went distant, not surprised, only tired. "Why was his mistake treated as a mistake?" she asked, while my explanation was treated as a lie. The room held the question longer than anyone wanted. Lorraine looked toward the screens. Hannah lowered her eyes. Evan crossed his arms. Graham shifted his weight. "I never said I saw you take it." "No," Nia said. "You said I moved it." Graham nodded. "You were the person I remembered." "Why?" He hesitated. "You stood out in that area." Nia looked at his polished shoes and company badge. "I stood out because you had already decided who belonged there." Graham's face tightened, not in anger but recognition. He had described Owen as a businessman. He had described Nia by her race, her old jacket, and the fact that she touched something. He had not intended to accuse her. Intent had not stopped his words from becoming evidence in someone else's mind. Evan broke the silence. "The bag is separate from the assault." Lorraine turned toward him. "Then we will review that separately." She ordered the body camera footage played at normal speed. Evan's recording showed him telling Nia to retrieve identification. It showed her announce the movement before reaching toward the tote. It showed his hand close around her wrist the instant she obeyed. Her warnings about the shoulder injury came through clearly. Evan increased the pressure anyway. Then came the 4 seconds. At normal speed, the movement looked sudden. In slow motion, it showed Nia redirecting Evan's force, avoiding his equipment, and releasing him the moment the pressure stopped. Then the audio captured Evan's report. "Officer assaulted by theft suspect." Lorraine paused the video. "That statement is not supported by what we just watched." With the theft allegation disproved and the footage showing no unprovoked assault, Lorraine ordered the cuffs removed. Hannah unlocked them while every camera in the room continued recording. Evan's jaw flexed. She put me on my knee. After you ignored 2 medical warnings and kept forcing her forward. She is trained. Nia answered before Lorraine could. Training is why I stopped. The room went quiet again. Graham's briefcase had been recovered, the device untouched, the documents secure. Yet no one moved to close the case. The missing property had exposed a larger question, recorded from several angles and impossible to hide. Why had Nia become the first suspect before anyone finished looking at the evidence? The room stayed quiet after the footage ended. On the far monitor, Owen Barrett sat in a small office answering routine questions while Graham's briefcase rested safely on a table. In the monitoring room, Nia rubbed the inside of her right wrist with 3 fingers, checking warmth, pulse, and movement. The gesture was small, almost absent-minded, but it carried the discipline of old training. One of the security analysts continued verifying her identification. Her driver's license matched. Her boarding pass matched. The database confirmed that Nia Holloway was a medically retired United States Air Force Major, then returned a restricted contact notice directing the analyst to federal coordination. It displayed no mission details. The analyst stopped typing. Sergeant Price, this record requires federal verification. Evan leaned toward the screen. The impatience in his face shifted into uncertainty. Until that moment, he had understood Nia only as the woman in the faded jacket who had questioned him in front of strangers. The title on the screen forced a new story into place, and his posture changed before he could hide it. A secure notification moved from airport operations to the Federal Coordination Center in the neighboring building. Jonah Reed was reviewing an emergency exercise when Nia's name appeared on his tablet. He read it once, then again. For a moment, the conference room around him fell away. He remembered a foreign terminal years earlier, emergency lights pulsing through smoke, a line of frightened personnel waiting for a route that kept closing. Nia had stood beside a service corridor with a map folded against her forearm, giving instructions in a voice so steady that people believed escape was possible because she sounded as if it already was. Jonah left the exercise without an entourage. He crossed the enclosed walkway alone and entered the monitoring room several minutes later in a dark suit with a federal badge clipped at his belt. His eyes found the marks on Nia's wrists before they found her face. He did not greet her. He did not ask about the old operation. He looked at Lorraine. What legal basis was used to keep her restrained after the footage cleared her? Lorraine glanced toward the screens. None. The property has been recovered. There is no evidence of theft, and the footage does not show an unprovoked assault. Jonah watched her place 3 fingers against the inside of her wrist again. Recognition crossed his face. Her team had used the same circulation check during evacuations when restraints, injuries, or long transports made numbness easy to miss. Major Holloway, he said. Nia looked up. The years between them showed only in the brief softening around her eyes. Director Reed. Evan's face lost color. Jonah explained only what the room needed to know. Years earlier, an American team had been trapped inside an overseas airport after a security collapse. Nia had led the group through a controlled evacuation, avoiding a confrontation that could have placed everyone in greater danger. She had not overpowered the crisis. She had read it correctly and refused to make it worse. Evan straightened and lowered his voice. Major, if I had known. Nia stopped him with a look. My rank did not make the ticket valid. It was valid before you knew my name. The words landed without triumph. That made them harder to dismiss. She had no interest in watching respect appear only after a title had authorized it. Jonah turned toward Evan. You are reacting to who she was. We need to examine how you treated her when you thought she was nobody. Nobody answered. On the screens, the evidence remained unchanged. The same ticket, the same briefcase, the same woman, the same choices. Only the room's perception of her had shifted, and that shift had become the most troubling evidence of all. An airport medic examined Nia's shoulder and wrists. She declined hospital transport, but accepted a cold pack and asked that every visible injury be documented in the incident record. By then, Nia's original flight had departed. The airline rebooked her for that evening, and Jonah notified the Washington office that she would arrive late for orientation. Airport Police Chief Elaine Davenport arrived before noon with 2 legal advisors and the controlled expression of someone accustomed to containing damage before it reached the public. She listened to Lorraine's summary, watched the body camera footage once, then placed both hands on the edge of the console. "What happened this morning appears to be a chain of regrettable misunderstandings," she said. Nia sat across from her with a cold pack resting against her shoulder. The marks around her wrists had darkened. "A misunderstanding happens when both sides lack information," she replied. "He had information and chose not to check it." Elaine's eyes shifted toward Evan, who now sat in a separate room without his badge or duty equipment. The distinction mattered. A mistake could be corrected. A choice required examination. By the end of the day, Internal Affairs had opened a formal review. Over the next 3 weeks, investigators reopened every complaint linked to Evan Rourke. They found 12 complaints filed during the previous 2 years. Most had been closed because camera angles were incomplete, audio was missing, or the officer's written account had been treated as more reliable than the passenger's memory. Read separately, each report sounded small. Together, they formed a pattern. Travelers had been asked why they were inside premium lounges after presenting valid access. A black business owner had been made to prove a corporate credit card carried his own name. A physician had been searched after an employee said she did not match the expected passenger profile. 2 people had been labeled uncooperative, though the available video had no sound and showed no visible resistance. The same phrases appeared again and again: unusual behavior, inconsistent appearance, failure to cooperate. Language had turned suspicion into procedure. Nia's case had not created the problem. It had supplied the missing evidence that made the older cases impossible to dismiss. Hannah gave a second statement without trying to protect herself. She admitted she had seen Evan speak gently to some passengers and sharply to others. She had called it impatience, arrogance, stress, anything except bias, because the softer words demanded less from her. "I thought prejudice had to sound obvious," she told Nia. "I thought I would know it when I heard it." Nia looked at her for a long moment. Bias does not need an insult. Sometimes it is simply who receives patience and who receives force. Hannah lowered her eyes. She had eventually told the truth, but truth delivered late did not erase the minutes when silence had helped power move unchecked. Graham returned voluntarily and formally acknowledged that his description had framed Nia as suspicious, while presenting Owen as respectable. Evan had been suspended on the day of the incident and stripped of his badge, weapon, and enforcement authority pending the investigation. Investigators found material differences between his radio call, his written statement, and the recordings. At the disciplinary hearing weeks later, the panel concluded that he had ignored exculpatory information, used unnecessary force, and filed a misleading report. He was dismissed, and his case was forwarded to the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council for certification review. Hannah received formal discipline for failing to intervene, though her cooperation was included in the record. No one called her brave. Accountability did not need a hero. It needed accuracy. Elaine still remembered watching through the glass on the morning of the incident as officers returned to ordinary work before lunch ended. The terminal had resumed its rhythm almost immediately, and that normalcy continued to unsettle her. Systems often survived harm by learning to look unchanged. Elaine later offered Nia a public apology and a press conference. Cameras, prepared remarks, the airport seal behind them. Nia declined. "I don't need a stage," she said. "I need proof that this department learned something when no one important was supposed to be watching." A Department of Aviation oversight panel met with Nia 6 weeks later in a windowless conference room above Concourse F. There were no reporters, prepared lights, or public relations staff waiting outside. A recorder sat in the center of the table, its red light steady. Nia wore the same olive jacket she had worn that morning. No uniform, no medals. Nothing that allowed the room to admire her before listening to her. 4 pieces of evidence rested in front of her. The valid first-class boarding pass, a still image of the briefcase beside the charging station, a screenshot showing the camera angle Evan refused to review, and footage of Owen Barrett being approached with patience after actually carrying the missing property across the terminal. One panel member leaned back and called the incident the result of time pressure, competing information, and an officer forced to make quick decisions. Nia watched him without interrupting. Why did time make him patient with one man and forceful with one woman? She asked. The man's expression shifted. Around the table, papers moved beneath uncomfortable hands. No one answered because the recordings already had. Nia did not ask them to promise that nothing similar would ever happen again. Promises were easy in quiet rooms. She asked for rules that would survive outside them. When no immediate danger existed, officers would have to review available video, radio updates, and witness information before using physical restraint. Any report describing a passenger as non-compliant would have to identify the exact instruction given, explain why it was necessary, and record what the passenger actually did. Officers who witnessed unnecessary escalation would be required to intervene instead of protecting a colleague's pride through silence. Stop and search data would be reviewed for patterns showing who received questions, who received patience, and who received force. Elaine Davenport listened without defending the department. Hannah's delay had taught them that silence could look professional while harm continued. Evans' reports had taught them that official language could hide unequal treatment behind words such as suspicious, difficult, and uncooperative. Nia made one final condition. Her face would not appear in airport advertisements, training campaigns, or statements celebrating reform. If the changes only matter while I am standing beside them, she said, then nothing changed. The oversight panel adopted the verification and intervention rules as interim policy, then ordered an independent 90-day review of reporting practices, stop data, and prior complaints. Nia understood that even those decisions were still only paper until officers followed them under pressure. The real test would come in ordinary moments, when no federal director knew the passenger's name and no camera clip had gone public. Several months later, she returned to Concourse F for her first full training assignment in Washington under her new role. She was scheduled to teach crisis response instructors how to slow a situation down before authority turned uncertainty into danger. The olive jacket remained faded at the elbows. The black tape still covered one corner of her suitcase. She could have replaced both. She had chosen not to. At the priority entrance, a young airline employee scanned her boarding pass. The screen flashed green. He compared the name with her identification, handed both back, and moved no differently than he had for the passenger ahead of her. His eyes did not linger on the patched luggage. He did not ask how she had entered the line or whether the ticket belonged to her. "Have a safe flight, Miss Holloway." "Thank you," Nia said. She walked through the gate and felt no victory, only a quiet release. No one recognized her former rank or knew whose lives she had once helped protect. This time, none of it was required. Her ticket established that she belonged there. Her humanity should always have been enough to earn respect. If Nia's story made you think, like this video and subscribe for more stories about dignity and justice. Which moment affected you most, and where are you watching from? Share it in the comments.